Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a massive collision course in Canadian politics. It's a story that pits a province's modern ambitions against ancient, legally binding promises. This is all about Alberta's push for sovereignty and the immovable roadblock of Indigenous treaties. You know, this one sentence from Grand Chief Trevor McCready, it cuts right through more than 100 years of political debate. It basically reframes this entire conversation, moving it away from just politics and economics to a much more fundamental question. Who actually has the ultimate authority over this land? Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at Alberta's big political power play. Then, we'll get into the treaty reality that's standing in the way. After that, we'll take a look back at a huge lesson from Quebec's history, dive into the legal fights happening right now, and finally, tackle the huge constitutional question this all leaves us with.
All right, so let's get into it. This whole thing really kicks off with one specific and very controversial piece of legislation, Alberta's Sovereignty Act.
Now, this wasn't just some random bill. This was the very first piece of legislation Premier Daniel Smith introduced. It was a huge statement of intent, right out of the gate, a deliberate challenge to how the province and the federal government have worked together for decades.
But here's where it gets really wild. The true power of this act is how far it reaches. It gives the provincial cabinet the authority to order all kinds of public bodies, we're talking police services, school boards, you name it, to just ignore federal laws. It's a clear attempt to take apart federal authority piece by piece.
But as Alberta pushes forward, it runs head first into a wall, a legal and constitutional wall that is way older and, you could argue, much more powerful than the province itself. This is what First Nations leaders call the treaty reality. So take a look at this map. This right here, this is the heart of the problem. The province we call Alberta is almost entirely built on lands that are covered by Treaties 6, 7, and 8. And these aren't just dusty old documents. They are living, breathing constitutional agreements that are part of the legal foundation of Canada. And here's the really crucial part. First Nations made these sacred nation-to-nation deals directly with the federal crown. Think about it. The province of Alberta didn't even exist for another 30 years. It wasn't part of the deal, so it can't just step in and say, hey, we're taking over now. And this whole relationship is held together by a core principle in Canadian law called the honor of the crown. And look, this isn't just some nice idea about being honorable. It's a legally binding fiduciary duty. That means the federal government has to act like a trustee, with an obligation to protect Indigenous interests and keep the promises made in those treaties. Now, this whole treaty roadblock, it isn't just a theory. To see how powerful it is in the real world, we just need to rewind to the moment Canada came closest to actually breaking apart. I mean, that campaign was unbelievably tense. You had polls swinging back and forth, and the future of the entire country was literally hanging in the balance, day by day. The entire country held its breath, and the no side, the side to keep Canada together, won by this razor-thin margin. Just over 54,000 votes. An incredible result. But, you know, that vote wasn't the final word on the matter. Because another voice spoke up. The Cree and Inuit peoples of northern Quebec, they asked a really profound question. They basically said, wait a second, if Quebec can vote to leave Canada, don't we have the right to vote to stay in Canada? They made it absolutely clear their people and their lands would not be dragged into a sovereign Quebec against their will. So they went and held their own referendums. And the result? Well, it wasn't just decisive. It was a landslide. And this, right here, created a seismic shift in Canadian law and politics. What it established was that any province trying to secede could actually face being partitioned itself. If Indigenous peoples chose to stay with Canada, a newly independent province could find itself without huge chunks of its territory. Which brings us right back to today. Because this exact same conflict is now shifting away from political speeches and into the courtrooms of Alberta. This is where all that history and theory slams into the real world. These lawsuits are forcing a huge, high-stakes showdown over the Constitution, and they're asking a really basic question. Who has the final say on treaty lands? As you can see here, it's not just one lawsuit. We have multiple First Nations fighting the province on several fronts, and they're being really strategic, targeting not just the Sovereignty Act itself, but the whole legal process Alberta has tried to set up for a potential separation vote. And the arguments at the core of these cases are powerful. Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation's position is a great example. They're saying, Look, it's not enough to just consult us. For something this huge, you need our active consent. And what's really critical is that they're also suing the federal government, basically telling them, you have a duty to step in and protect these treaties.
So where does this all leave us?
Well, we're basically watching a clash of two completely different ideas of sovereignty playing out on the exact same piece of land. And you have to understand, this isn't some simple political squabble you can work out in a negotiation. It's a fundamental, head-on collision between two competing claims to ultimate authority. One is based on modern provincial politics, the other on constitutional law that's as old as the country. So on one side, you have the provincial view, which is all about using its power to deal with what it sees as federal overreach. And on the other side, you have the Indigenous view, which asserts that the treaties they signed are the highest law of the land, protected by the Constitution and predating the province itself. So what this really boils down to is that the government of Alberta has set a course to solve a political problem, but in doing so, it has steered the province directly towards a constitutional iceberg, the simple, foundational reality of the treaties that cover the very land it governs. And all of this leaves us with the one huge and maybe unanswerable question at the very heart of this conflict. Can a province that is literally built on a foundation of treaties with the Crown just decide to leave Canada without the consent of its original treaty partners? The answer to that, well, it could define the future of the entire country.